5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer. And although I have nothing but contempt for Pacific Rim Uprising, I never fell out of love with the original Pacific Rim. I still think that movie holds up to this day. So, naturally, when I learned that McFarlane Toys was releasing a new set of figures based on that original movie, I had to pre-order them, and I've got most of them right here. I say most because I thought I had Striker Eureka as part of the set, but I apparently missed it. Oh well, I can get it some other time. I've got 99% of it here, though. Well, 98, but the starter set, as they're calling it, still has yet to be released, ironically. But anyway, I've got this stuff here, and I figure I may as well take a look and see how they did. Now, these are 4-inch figures released in what McFarlane usually calls the Page Punchers line, because they are not only figures, they also come with comic books. The Jaegers come with issues for, Tales from the Drift, and the Kaiju come with issues from Aftermath. I'll look at those comics another day, but right now, we're going to look at the figures. I'm going to start with the accessories, because every figure comes with the same basic accessories. They each come with 1 building and 2 vehicles, in addition to the comics as mentioned. Oh, and the buildings each have a little street base that you can set them on. And you'll notice that there's going to be a lot of repetition in this regard, because, well, the buildings mostly have the same pieces, and the bases are all the same, with the only real exceptions being the tops. As you can see, there are slightly different ones, but even then, you still have some repeats here and there. And as for the vehicles, well, that's where you're going to see a lot of repetition. There are a lot of tanks, a lot of troop transport trucks. Only 2 of the figures come with aerial vehicles, and one of them happens to be one of the ones I got this time. But anyway, let's take a closer look. As you can see, the buildings don't have much in terms of paint detail. They're all solid gray, and the street portions are a slightly different gray, with some light markings for separating lanes. Overall, though, they're meant mostly for the background. They're meant to enhance the scene. They're not meant to be the primary feature. Each segment of building is hollow on top, though it also has some crumbling texture on the top portion. And one thing you might notice is that the broken portions where all of these segments connect are all the same outline. Like, they're all the same pattern. Which means you could just stack them all to their maximum height, or you can do little variations. You can even go so far as to just have a really short building like that. Give your cityscape some levels. Have it look a bit more like an actual cityscape. It's an interesting little feature right there. As for the vehicles, they're just basically solid olive military green. And while detail is fine on them, they're ultimately not going to have that much to them. I mean, the wheels don't spin, there's no paint variation. The only movement you'll find is on the tanks, where the turrets can move, and that goes for these different looking tanks as well. Although they're not going to move that much from what I can tell. For the aircraft, the Chinook's rotors don't turn, they're fixed, although it still looks good. The jet, meanwhile, it is flat, like very flat as you can see. Looks good from the top or bottom, but yeah, I'm kind of surprised they went that flat with it, but oh well. There's no stand for the flying craft either, so you gotta find some other way to make it look like they're flying like that, if you want them to be part of the display, or have a monster holding on to them if you can manage that. But like I said, these are just for the backdrop. These are to enhance a display. They look fine, but they're not necessarily going to have that much detail because they're just there for the background. What about the actual figures? That's where we're going to get a closer look. All right, let's start with the Jaegers. Like I said, I didn't get Striker Eureka. That was an oversight on my part. But I do have Gypsy Danger, Crimson Typhoon, and Cherno Alpha. And for the most part, I would say the sculpt is pretty accurate. They all look like their respective mechas. Being so small, the detail isn't going to be like that much. Certainly not to the same level as NECA in terms of either the sculpting detail or the paint, but still, for something that's small, it does get the job done. Although only the fronts are bothered to be detailed in any significant way. If you turn them around, they're just solid from top to bottom. There's no paint variation there at all, unless it's on the limbs, which technically count as the front. Which, I mean, I guess most displays are going to be depicting these guys facing forward anyway, but, you know, a little detail on the back wouldn't have hurt, I don't think. In terms of paint in other regards, like, the only paint job I think that really bothers me is Crimson Typhoon, because the paint job is, I think, a little too bright. Like, this is a very bright red, but the name is Crimson Typhoon because it's crimson, like more this shade on my shirt. And I kind of feel like maybe he's just a little too bright. The blue on Gypsy Danger is accurate. The military green on Cherno Alpha is accurate. I don't know why they went so bright with Crimson Typhoon. Although, in terms of other details, like the shoulder emblem, that's painted quite well. I see no issues with that. We also have a few unusual anomalies, like how you may notice Cherno Alpha's arms are fully extended. You recall in the movie, this mech has that feature where the arm can remain stationary, but the fist can extend out from this point to punch a kaiju. Here they just have them fully extended, and I guess they figured that made it look a little bit more interesting. I don't know. And also, you'll notice that Gypsy's sword is fully extended, and this is permanently attached to the arm. You cannot remove it, which might be an annoyance if you want to display Gypsy without the sword, but this is what they went with, so you're kind of stuck with it, unless you really want to go out of your way to customize. And also, while I'm on Gypsy Danger, you may notice the feet aren't resting quite flat because I'm able to rock it very easily like this. See from the side, maybe you can get a better sense. Now again, I don't know if that's just the figure I got because I have this weird tendency to get slightly imperfect figures when I'm doing this sort of thing. But it does mean that Gypsy has a hard time balancing. Like, you have to have at least the sword arm pointed forward somewhat to ensure that there's more gravity pulling the mech forward than backward in order to get her to stand properly. But then again, as I keep saying, maybe it's just this one. Now, these aren't static figures. They do have articulation. Both Cherno and Gypsy can move their arms at the elbows. They can also move their arms at the shoulders. And they have leg movement and knee movement. Also, curiously, Cherno Alpha is the only mech that has details on the bottom of the feet. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. For Crimson Typhoon, all of the arms can move, though none of the elbows on the right arm can move. Though the elbow on the left arm can, and the shoulder even has a bit of swivel to it. And legs can move at the hips, no knee joints, but you can turn the head, which is okay, I guess. So I assume this would somehow also be reflected in the quality of Striker Eureka as well. Overall, I'd say the Jaegers are pretty straightforward. Again, lacking in certain paint details, but overall still recognizable as the mecha they're supposed to be. A little bit more articulation and better balance with Gypsy would have been nice, but I guess they are what they are. Now let's get on to the Kaiju. Now how about this for variety? We have Knifehead, Leatherback, Otachi, and Raiju. And I think this is actually the first time Raiju's gotten a figure, which I'm kind of surprised by. When NECA was doing the Pacific Rim figures, obviously, because they had the same body types, they did Knifehead, Trespasser, and Scunner, and they did Otachi and Leatherback and whatnot, but then they started doing, like, Karloff and Bladehead and Kaiju that barely had any screen time. Raiju's like a significant player at the end, and he's got a relatively straightforward design, but for some reason he was never given a figure. So when it comes to these particular Kaiju, I find them to either be really good or really bad, nothing in between. Let's start with Knifehead. Knifehead, again, looks like Knifehead, and the only thing I would really say is inaccurate is that the shell on the back is a bit smaller than it ought to be, and the spikes that are supposed to protect the shoulders are much, much smaller. Otherwise, he looks like Knifehead. But you may also notice his feet aren't quite sitting on the ground the way they're supposed to. Now, his legs do not move. Despite being separate pieces, they are fixed in place. And because he's lunging forward, he can't really stand on his own unless one of the bigger arms is touching the ground. Now, fortunately, both of these big arms can move, and the small arms can move as well. And there appears to be a hip joint, but it doesn't appear to have that, it's only got so much give to it. Otherwise, though, I mean, this was a huge misstep, because he should be able to stand on his own, but instead he has to be in sort of a tripod stance in order to remain upright. Something similar can be said for Leatherback because of his position, and his legs are also affixed, but then again, he was designed to have that more gorilla-type body. And his arms can move, like he has elbow and shoulder rotation. See? Really unstable. What did I tell you? I'm going to set both of his arms touching the ground. That's really the only movement he has. Again, a little bit of give to a hip joint, but, you know, can't move the mouth, can't move the hind legs. But, you know, considering he has to stand like this anyway, it's not bad. We kind of expected this from Leatherback, I think. With Otachi, now Otachi is my favorite of the Pacific Rim Kaiju, and I always regretted never getting a figure of it when NECA had the license. But Otachi's got some interesting stuff to her, like, again, also in a tripod stance, although you may notice the hand isn't quite touching the ground, so Otachi can technically balance without that extra support, even if it's lifted up, you see? The weight is more back here than it is forward, like with Knifehead. Arms and legs can all move. You can position them any way you want. The wings, of course, do not unfurl. And we also, you may notice, there are a few holes along the tail because it's bendable. You see how unstable this guy is? So, bendable tail. Not like super bendable, but it's got enough give to it that you can position it in different ways. Although, that's about it. And again, like, you look at detail so far, I really should have pointed out detail. They're accurate up to a point, but like, Otachi and Knifehead have these weird lines running from their eyes to their mouths. Maybe that's supposed to look like battle damage or something. On Knifehead, it looks a little weird. Otachi, not as much, but... And I'm not sure if the paint is completely accurate. It looks like they maybe incorporated a little bit of the Offspring into it, but Oh well, still looks good. And then of course we have Raiju, sculpted in a standing pose even though he's in a swimming pose for most of the movie. All arms and legs can move, and the head can rotate, and also a bendable tail. And overall, Raiju looks really cool, really sleek. Digging that design. He was, if I remember the art book correctly, he was designed to not look like he should be able to stand, because he was designed specifically to swim, but standing up he looks pretty good. Now suppose theoretically you want to display with other kaiju, to do sort of a crossover thing. Well, these being 4-inch figures, they're not usually going to scale with 6-inch figures. Or are they? Technically speaking, MonsterVerse versions of the kaiju like Godzilla were always bigger than anything in Pacific Rim. So 6-inch figures of Godzilla and Rodan and whatnot from that particular film series actually are to scale with these figures. But if you want to keep things more on the level, what are your options? How many 4-inch kaiju figures are there? Well, recent releases in the Ultra Monster line, like Naranga here, the original Naranga, are actually much smaller. They're more 4-inch than 6-inch. So they actually look pretty well alongside these figures. As does Mezco's recent line of Godzilla figures. They are in the 4-inch range, and although they're on a completely different level of detail, you could potentially set something up to have a crossover display with these guys in it. So overall, I would say the line is one heck of a mixed bag. There are plenty of areas where they could have improved, like better joints or having knife head be properly balanced. But then, of course, you have stuff like Raiju looking good, the details on Otachi and Leatherback, Gypsy Danger, and Cherno Alpha having good articulation. Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag with this one. For the price, I would say it's not terrible, but, you know, I know McFarlane can do better. They're ultimately, I would say, slightly improved from the NECA figures, but also there are some detriments. So, yeah, I think the ultimate takeaway is that it's a mixed bag with these guys. You have stuff that's really flawed like Knifehead, you have stuff that's perfectly fine like Crimson Typhoon and Raiju, but even then there are still questions about did they make the right paint choice, could they have added a little more detail. But you know, for what they are, I guess they're not bad, but they could have been better. Then again, they also could have been worse. So if you're interested, I would say maybe pick your favorites or something, and keep in mind there might be some issues. But at the same time, how many figures are there of Raiju exactly? That's my ultimate verdict. Again, they come with comic books as well, but I'll look at those another day. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.